this lesson, we're going to talk about the impacts of the Great Depression. So far, you've looked at the Roaring Twenties and the causes of the Great Depression. We know that we went from a booming economy and a lackadaisical sense after World War One. Life was good, business was booming, consumer goods were off the charts, to crash, panic, and desperation. So let's talk about what it looked like to live throughout the Great Depression. Obviously, after the crash, and remember, the crash wasn't the only thing that caused. There was things building up over time, poor banking, buying on credit, overproduction, so on and so forth. That leads every level of society to have some sort of impact during the Great Depression. Not everybody went from riches to rags overnight, but there were a lot of people who were severely impacted. And again, like we said, on every level, people felt the effects of the Depression. A lot of people who do become unemployed, unfortunately also become homeless almost overnight. And we set up what are known as Hoovervilles. As you can see in the photo on the bottom right, some of the people who were homeless, they lived out of their cars or they couldn't sell them. But a lot of them set up what become known as Hoovervilles. They're shanty towns or little settlements. This one, the picture here is outside of Manhattan. But they're set up all over the nation. They basically built a house or a structure, some sort of a dwelling, to put a roof over their head with whatever scrap material they could find. Papers, cardboard, wood if they could find it. As you can see here, they look, pretty well put together, but they're also very dangerous conditions. This one here looks pretty spread out, but some other of these shanty towns become very close, congested. Sometimes there were riots in them, sometimes they burnt down, so they weren't the safest place to live. They do become known as Hoovervilles because, again, at the time, the president was Herbert Hoover, and so it's basically a smack in his face to say that, look, you're supposed to be helping us out, you're the president, you're the leader, and there's so many people homeless, jobless, this is what it's come to. So another thing that's causing problems, especially in the farming community out in the Midwest, is the fact that there was a severe drought, and then also there had been some poor farming practices that basically stripped the land of their protective prairie grasses out in the Midwest. And this causes huge dust storms out in the Great Plains region. Basically, that area was stripped of its natural protective soil. The area becomes reduced to dust, and combine that with, like I said, strong drought, or severe drought and strong winds, it becomes known as the Dust Bowl. So as you can see in the pictures here, we have large clouds that circulate this dust. Sometimes the dust could be seen or traveled by wind as far as like Manhattan or the East Coast. Wouldn't have looked as severe as this, but you could see like a haze almost. But it's causing devastation in the farming community. So this terrible weather, plus the Dust Bowl, plus low prices that they were already suffering from, this caused about 60% of farming families in the Midwest to lose their farms, unfortunately, during this time period. So other areas that we have impacts on health, especially children. Kids are highly affected by the Great Depression because they're the ones that spend the majority of their life living in it. The Great Depression lasted 11 years, from 1929 all the way till 1941, with the entry of World War II. So that's quite a significant amount of time. A lot of people, are going hungry. They have to find, if they can, soup kitchens and bread lines. Children sometimes are shipped off to other family members. They are, if they can't be taken care of by their family, mom and dad might be trying to work as much as possible and they need somebody to watch the kids. So the idea is, I'm going to ship them out to somewhere else. Some kids were actually sold. If you research it, there's kids that were sold because families just couldn't take care of them, unfortunately. Kids also suffer long-term social, emotional, physical, medical, all kinds of different problems due to this time period. You can definitely tell a person who lived through the Great Depression. Unfortunately, this generation is quickly passing away right now, but my grandparents, they were kids of the Depression, and these types of people you can identify them because they hold on to things. They really know the value of money. They also they I don't want to say hoard things like the show Hoarders, but they do hold on to things with the idea of they might not get it back. The idea that let me conserve as much as I can. I don't want to be wasteful. My grandmother was well known for this. We would go to places like McDonald's, let's say, and if we got a drink, she'd take 2 straws. The idea she would keep it in her purse just in case she needed it someday. It's silly. A thing like a straw is so silly. It's something to hold on to, but it's just the mentality that they grew up with. The idea of going 11 years without being able to have certain things. The idea that something might be taken away from you again later in life. They held on to that. We also see an impact or stress on family life. Living conditions decline. People moved back. Some people had moved out to the suburbs because life was so good, but now we see people moving back into those tenement conditions that we saw during the Industrial Revolution just to save money. A lot of men begin to feel like failures because they can't provide for their families. We see an increase in suicide rates during this time period. Women are looked down upon or accused of taking jobs away from men. So that becomes an issue. There's a whole problem between the gender issues. And then we also have a lot of discrimination between minorities, African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, any immigrants that are still coming in to the nation, because there's just high competition for jobs at this time period. We see an increase in lynchings in the Deep South, and we start to see different aid programs that unfortunately discriminate against African Americans and other minorities. Americans do try to pull themselves together, kind of band to combat the Great Depression as much as they can. They basically, whatever they can do, if you see your neighbor struggling, you try, if you can, try and help them out as much as they possibly can, especially those who are, aren't as impacted as much as, say, your neighbor. Maybe you didn't lose everything, or you didn't lose next to everything. If you can help a fellow citizen, you're going to try and do that as much as you can. We definitely saw this out in the Midwest with all those farms that are closing down. If a bank forced a farm to foreclose, things went up for auction. The machinery, the land, tools, equipment, things like that, and they would hold public auctions, like you can see in the picture below. People who, neighboring farmers would go to these auctions and they would bid pennies, 2-3 cents for a large machinery, something that should cost hundreds of dollars. And then the idea would be that somebody else would buy it, and then they would return it to the original owner free of cost. And so these auctions actually became known as penny auctions. A lot of Americans look to the federal government. They call for political and economic change. This will lead us into the next topic, the idea that, there was an election on the horizon, and is it time for a change in the White House? Is there a time for a change with the way in which we interact with the economy and politics? Thanks for watching. Make sure you enter this into your interactive notebook.